I'm Lacey, and today I'm joined by my friends Drew Casey.
Hey.
Grace Chesson.
Hello.
John Blaha.
Hello.
And Kevin Ferdosi.
Hello.
Venezuela's opposition party took majority control of the National Assembly, the first time in 17 years that the opponents of the socialist revolution led by late President Hugo Chavez will control any institution in the South American country. The two-thirds opposition majority won by a landslide, giving it an unprecedented strength to challenge President Maduro's rule. So, before we get into the political and economic issues, why is this change in the majority so significant?
Well, I mean, as you started off with, it's the first time that any opposition or any opposing party has controlled any institution within the Venezuelan government since 1999. Almost effectively ending just continuous rule of Chavista era government.
What is Chavista era government? Is this is Chavista the ideology of Hugo Chavez, or is this something that predates him?
No, that's exactly right. It's Hugo Chavez was elected president in 1999, and he ruled up until the point of his death when he publicly announced his chosen successor, who would be Nicolás Maduro. It wasn't some dictatorial transition to a new leader. It was they actually had an election and everything, and it was quite the controversial election and very, very close between Nicolás Maduro and his opponent. He won by about he had 50.4%.
Right. Yeah, the elections were actually contested by his opponent. I think that the election committee actually went over and decided that there was no voter fraud in the end.
So what caused this change? I mean, this is a huge, important, significant issue. Why did this suddenly fracture? Why did that party fracture and lose popularity?
Well, I think the main reason why the opposition was able to win in such a landslide was simply because of the state of living or the quality of life in Venezuela. Goods and resources were becoming very scarce. They had unprecedented inflation. I think I saw up to 170% inflation.
Yeah, I think they're suffering from the worst inflation in the world right now, actually.
And a lot of that actually comes to their dependency on oil. They have a national oil company, and I believe 95% of the Venezuelan economy is dependent on their oil industry.
Right, and when the price of oil has plummeted in the last year.
$35 a barrel currently, right?
Well, talking about prices, just in general, the government has also instituted price ceilings on a number of goods, which has stalled the economy where, you can't make a higher profit. And so there is some fear that the new Congress will remove those ceilings. But looking back, the significance of this election, I was reading an article where, one person on the street, when asked, was just said, I've been forced to stand in these long lines and the economy is horrible. So it's just really wanting a change. I think that's the main thing.
Exactly. And at the beginning of 2015, the Maduro government actually had a 70% disapproval rate, which is insanely high. And obviously that shows some want for change amongst the Venezuelan people.
Well, I think one important thing to note here is that I saw in one of the sources that I was reading in preparation for this, I think an Economist article, which we will post on the website, is that so these macroeconomic issues that are affecting Venezuela's oil market, I mean, these are happening independent of things that are happening within the country of Venezuela. They're affecting Venezuela, and they would be bad either way. Right. But the political situation and the social trends within the country are very heavily exacerbating this issue, making it so much worse than it otherwise would be.
Even though they're exacerbating the issue, it's actually funny because in a sense they are legal according to Venezuelan law. The way their government is set up, not entirely foreign compared to ours. They have a legislative branch and an executive branch. It's just the way that their system of checks and balances work just allowed the system to find itself in the situation that it is today.
Yeah, and also, since you were mentioning how important the oil industry is, the oil industry, I think, is nationalized in the country, right?
Yeah.
So several years back, during the Chavez government, he replaced the people who were like the CEOs and the high-level officials in the oil industries who were professionals on the topic, and then replaced them with loyalists, which led to a lot of mismanagement, which is why they haven't been able to cope with these lower prices.
He was actually able to do things like that because the Maduro government, Chavista government at the time, they voted to allow the president to rule by decree, which enabled him to make a lot of these executive decisions like that.
Yeah, they did that twice.
Twice, exactly. And I think Maduro's rule by decree actually expired within the last month or so.
And I mean, Maduro wields a lot of power. So, you're talking about checks and balances, but in this system, really, the executive has a lot more power than the legislative. At least that's what it seems to me.
Sure, particularly when your Congress is vast majority of the same party, which is not the case anymore, obviously.
I mean, that's what checks and balances is for. It's to allow opposing parties to challenge each other. And when one party controls every single institution in a country, there's not much check for power or things like that.
Right. I mean, I just feel, from what I've read, it seems that, even with this new Congress in power, Maduro is still going to be able to pull out some tricks. I mean, there has been issues of corruption and a number of issues where in laws that he has put into place in ways that he has manipulated the system so that he can wield more power than Congress.
I mean, it is important to point out that he has been manipulating the system, and his legally bestowed power of rule by decree allowed him to make a lot of these changes. And since that expired, and since the election of the new majority opposition legislative body, they are starting to challenge a lot of his decrees and things like that, such as they will have the power to replace different figureheads, to release political prisoners or...
Yeah, I know that's been a big push. I mean, but the question is, again, there are these high expectations, and how much of it will really be able to be implemented?
Hold on, we haven't even talked about the opposition party yet. Our opposition is led by Henry Ramos. Can somebody give me a brief background on his rise or where he came from?
Well, first of all, I mean, one key thing to note as well is that Henry Ramos is the leader of a coalition of parties. So there's multiple parties. There's several of them. We won't get into who they all are, but generally they are opposed ideologically and on terms of economic policy with the ruling Chavista set of parties, which we'll talk about in a minute. And this band, this coalition, which doesn't happen in the United States because we have a two-party system. So it's kind of important to note that this is a key aspect of the Venezuelan political system. This opposition party is called the MUD, the Mesa de la Unificación Democrática, I think. So this is a coalition and not just like a single party. And Henry Ramos Ayub is the leader. So one of the criticisms of the Chavista government, both under Chavez and especially now under Maduro, is that the government has exacerbated the fiscal situation within the country, which has caused runaway inflation to just reach new heights, which I think we touched on a few minutes ago. And Maduro just appointed a new, I believe, executive for the central bank, which in Venezuela is responsible for printing currency. And this guy does not believe that inflation exists, which is a massive problem for someone who needs to control the inflation situation.
Particularly for the country that has the worst inflation problem in the world.
Right. It seems like a joke, but it's not. So one of the issues, too, so why do they have inflation is because their revenues from oil sales were dropping so drastically, but they still had made these promises to prop up sort of this welfare system that they were spending way too much money on. The government decided to just start printing more money, right? Which is a classic mistake. The
classic strategy a lot of countries do in order to fulfill their promises.
A lot of countries do it.
Yeah.
Very few do it quite to the scale that Venezuela did.
Yeah, and none of them do it successfully, and I think that's the key point. It can't be done.
Right, it can't be done, but they really pushed it as hard as they could. And we don't have concrete numbers here; we can look these up. But the situation now is essentially the Venezuelan currency, the Bolivar Fuerte, the strong Bolivar, is worth almost nothing, and is in fact not strong at all.
So what does Maduro and Henry Ramos's newfound sharing of power do to U.S. relations? Do we see this as a
With
good
Venezuela?
thing? Yeah.
Well, I think the United States has come out publicly, and as it does with every democratic election, no matter the state of the relationship that the United States has with whatever entity just held a democratic election, congratulated the legislative body, the National Assembly, for holding a successful democratic election, but simultaneously expressed concern for the actions of the executive branch, right? So Maduro and his administration.
I think this provides a lot of opportunity for improving relations between the two countries. I mean, the U.S. and Venezuela have had a historically tense relationship, I'd say, under Hugo Chavez and Maduro.
Well, I mean, part of the legitimacy base that Chavez built for his support was that the Americans are meddling in our economy, they're meddling in our government.
A huge portion of that is just the anti-American rhetoric that he really spread throughout not just Venezuela, but the region itself.
Right, and that's still what they blame the failing economy on.
Maduro actually has a big history of spreading U.S. blasphemy around the world. You know, they have really close relations with Cuba. And, you know, prior to our own recent diplomatic renewal in Cuba, when Maduro was working under Chavez, when he was still alive, you know, he actually, you know, he publicly said things with countries such as Cuba that put down the any prospect of U.S. relations.
And I think also in terms of, you know, improving relations, the new Congress and under Henry Ramos, a lot of the initiatives they're looking to push are, you know, along our values. And so looking to fight corruption, which has been a big thing, the jailing of journalists. So they're really looking to push back a lot of these Chavez era, a lot of the policies.
So let's talk about corruption then in this case. So what does the corruption necessarily look like? Like, what is corruption essentially? I mean, I think a lot of discussion around just this general idea of corruption is that it is like stealing money, right, from, you know, the public coffers and using it for personal gain. And certainly that's going on. But there are many other aspects to corruption in Venezuela that is not just money related.
I think for this, a lot of it is more patronage. So Chavez and Maduro have been able to, you know, they have a lot of power through you know, all of the government, and have put loyalists, like Kevin mentioned earlier, into positions of power, especially when, you know, you have,
and that's corruption too.
Exactly. So it's this patronage, like these circles.
One of the good things about this new National Assembly, though, this new Venezuelan Congress, is that they can undo a lot of, you know, these loyalist appointments throughout the Venezuelan government. They very well be able to fire the new head of the Venezuelan banking system. It's within their power to challenge that, and they've already started doing that.
Right, and I think also with a 2/3 majority vote, they're able to remove Supreme Court justices as well.
And I think it's safe to say that, you know, they will more than likely not give Maduro the power to rule by decree, as the last National Assembly has been doing.
Yeah, and then another thing that they could do is that apparently after the president's been in power for half of his term, with a 2/3 vote, they're able to have a referendum and see whether or not they want to keep Maduro in power.
Because it is a long presidential term.
Exactly. And the Venezuelan government has resoundingly said we're not going to keep him in power, which is interesting that they've already at this juncture come out and said that they're in strong opposition. So it's very interesting.
I mean, I think this is just going to turn into a power struggle because, you know, we say the Congress can do, you know, all of this, but do we think that will Maduro be able to, you know, put speed bumps in there that really halts this process?
Will they be, and the question I think remains though, are they going to really be any more effective than the United States' Congress? I mean, we see this power struggle on a consistent basis between the two parties and the inability to block each other. And I think it's really no different. When
you get down to that, it just sounds like petty politics. I don't know if there's ever a solution for anything like that.
Agreed.
I think, though, the issues, I mean, again, this is a problem of scale and degree. Like, I think the issues in Venezuela are so much more massive than the issues that we have here. I mean, they have corruption issues that, and we have them here too, but
Absolutely.
they are endemic, they're systemic, they're almost intractable, right? So, I mean, it is extremely difficult to once it's like quicksand with corruption, because it is a culture, right? It is a political culture. It's a way of doing
Nepotism
business.
plays a role into
it is
it too.
extremely difficult to like kind of dredge yourself back up out of that.
It's inbred.
And
yeah.
so I mean, these new guys in the National Assembly that have a vision, go for it, and hopefully things improve. But I think even if they knock their opposition out of the way, the ruling party that's been in power and this ruling idea of Chavismo that's been in the way, they will still probably have issues that they're going to have to deal with.
Their encounter with, on their own. Absolutely.
It's also really, really early to tell, where they're going to take the Venezuelan government, because they were elected at the beginning of December. They were sworn in January, and they're still having some trouble getting the entire newly elected National Assembly members properly appointed into power. So it's just really early to see what's going to happen right now.
Absolutely.
And I think another thing is going to be maintaining the support of the population. Hugo Chavez and Chavismo and Maduro, while the approval rating is really low, that ideology that carried him into power, this leader of the socialist revolution, a lot of people, it has a place in the heart of a lot of the people in Venezuela.
Well, yeah, if they're not able to create the change that they've been promising, then they probably won't maintain the support. And at this point, when the inflation is so terrible, scarcity is a really bad problem. I don't know how you can dig yourself out of this kind of hole. So it's going to be hard for them to maintain support.
I think that's a really good point. So when you have such a tremendously faltering economy, and you had such an emotive ideological system in place that let you down so hard, right? Because Hugo Chavez had tremendous support, right? Certainly over the last half of our lifetimes. But so this ideological system is failing, right? And we see concrete evidence of that with this legislative election. A lot of Chavismos and Chavismas, people who supported the previous ideology, are let down. They're so let down, and they're struggling economically that when they place their newfound hope on this new thing that they're not so sure of, I think the stakes might be so much higher for the new folks in town, right? To like not let these people down again. And I wonder if there might not be a snapback towards Chavismo or something similar to that, or some sort of worse lashback, because you get less of a chance the second time when you're picking up the pieces of someone else's mess.
I can see that. I mean, and the thing is, the new Congress can't increase oil prices. That's, this is a situation that's out of their control. So a lot of the things, yes, there can be a number of improvements within the government, but some of the larger contextual, issues, they can't change.
I don't know. I kind of want to be optimistic about
I was going to say, we need some good optimism. Absolutely.
I do kind of want to be optimistic about a change in the majority ideology for, just the Venezuelan population at large. This past National Assembly election saw the largest turnout of voters in Venezuelan, at least recent history, which does show like a commitment to
democracy,
a commitment to democracy, a commitment to change. And this was amidst the Maduro government, almost forcing people to go vote, to maintain the majority rule. And, the opposition, MUD, they still won by a landslide. So I think this shows that the people of Venezuela do want to see some change. They do. I don't know if that's to say they have faith in the new government or the new legislative body, or if they're just sick of
the old one,
Chavista era governing.
Well, I mean, a key factor too, again, and not to say that I'm not as optimistic as you are in this, but I think, again, the situation is dire. There was a great Washington Post article that came out this past week that we'll throw up on the website as well, that was sort of describing one of the greatest lines in that piece was, the only thing that Venezuela's economy has abundance of is lines, right? So lines for the grocery store waiting to get rations. And what has the government done to sort of clean up the optics of that situation? Pick through the line and look at everybody's ID card, national ID card, and turn them away based on what the number of their ID card is and say, like, come back Thursday. And there's one guy, you know, that was talking to the journalist and he said, but I'm hungry now, right? I mean, when you like kind of click down Maslow's hierarchy and you slide down to that bottom level of like, I got to eat now. I mean, new guy, old guy, chavismo, socialismo, you know, whatever ismo you're talking about is like, I need to eat. And if you're the person that's going to give me the food, then I'm going to vote for you next time, right?
Right. And this in turn has also fueled the black market because, like you said, people need to eat now. And even, you know, Grace mentioned earlier that there are price ceilings on the staple foods, right? Like eggs, for example. If people can't get their hands on it, then they go to the black market and spend a lot more.
And the story from the central government is this isn't inflation that is causing these high prices that is backing up these lines. It is, in fact, capitalism propped up by the American cronies who are tricking the store owners and the property owners to jack their prices up as high as possible because they so evilly want to make money off of you, the poor.
Put a disclaimer out there. That's the Maduro government's point of view, not Drew Casey's.
Can we end on a positive note? Is there any way for us to see a positive future for Venezuela? I mean, like you already said, John, having a huge turnout at the polls means that people are willing to get involved. And yes, it may have to do with the fact that eating on a daily basis has now become a significant worry in the daily lives of people. But regardless, I think that's still a huge, important thing that even Americans aren't doing.
I don't know. I guess for me, kind of like I said earlier, I think this denotes a change from Chavez era governing, and whether that change is good or bad, I'm going to hope that it's good.
I don't know how positive I can be. No, I mean, I think that these are long-term issues. I think in the short term, I don't really know. I think it's a bleak future, at least in the short term. Moving forward, one thing that the government can do is diversify, right? So if 95% of their exports rely on oil, that's something that needs to change. It's going to take a while for that to happen. But, you know, like I said, long term, maybe there are some positive possibilities.
I think to bring in an analogy from a sport I don't watch, like in football, like when you snap the ball, that is simultaneously your moment of greatest opportunity and greatest danger, right? So when the ball is free falling through the air, you don't know if it's going to get worse or it's going to get better. And I think Venezuela is in that period right now. So it could get really good and it could get really bad.
That was beautiful, Drew. So on that note, we're going to close out for the day. Thank you for joining us. For more information and to see the articles we've mentioned, please visit us at mattersofstate.org. You can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter to get our updates. Tune in to us next time. Thanks for listening.
The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on the mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot.